Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. Today I am going to be doing a tasting of 3 whiskeys, an age series that has been released by Jack Daniels. They do this each year. This year we got a 10-year, a 12-year, and a 14-year, all new batches, and I got little sample bottles from them, so I'm going to go in and do a tasting on those and give you my opinion on them in terms of what I nose and taste, and actually I'll even tell you which one I kind of lean into as a favorite. It's been an interesting week for Jack Daniels and their parent company, Brown-Forman. It sounds like they are in merger talks with Pernod Ricard. I'm not a huge fan of merger talks, especially when we're talking about a storied family brand, but when you have a Four Roses that, they've been owned by Seagrams in the past. Brown-Forman is a decent-sized company, and they bought up Jack Daniels, so mergers are nothing new in that regard. You just hope that some of these distilleries don't start losing their personality. I think Diageo has been really good about holding on to the personalities of a lot of their Scottish distilleries. Hopefully the same thing happens with Jack Daniel, and we don't see a bottle come out called Jacques Daniel, since this is a French company that is looking at acquiring them. Anyway, we will see what kind of changes come about. It's also been an interesting week as I released the Uncle Nearest episode this week and dove in and kind of retooled that history tied to actual events that I can document. And interesting to note that it's possible that Nearest Green actually stayed on Dan Call's farm working for a long time and actually was distilling for other people besides Dan Call on Dan Call's farm. So I go into all that great detail, and just interesting to note the ties between the Tully family, the Hughes family, the Eaton family, some historic names here in terms of Lincoln County whiskey that all distilled on Dan Call's farm. And we would think that Dan Call was the one that was distilling on his farm, but that's not what I'm finding in the records. So it's really interesting. And if you haven't heard those episodes, I would say go back and check them out. And I say episodes because on the regular Whiskey Lore podcast, I basically do my breakdown and, kind of reinvestigate the story. And then on Patreon, I've done a Behind the Lore episode where I go even deeper into it and talk about some of the myths around Jack and Nearest in the early years. And in about 2 weeks, I'm going to be coming out with another episode around Jack Daniels, talking about this oldest registered distillery claim and going into where that came from and how it evolved. So going to have some fun stuff on that. So it's just appropriate that I am now tasting their 10-year, 12-year, and 14-year-old whiskeys. And so we're going to start off first with this batch. Let's see. Let me pull this up here, actually. We're going to start. I'm going to go back to front. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with this batch 2, which is the 14-year-old whiskey. These are all made with the same mash bill, just aged different lengths and put in different parts of warehouses. And 14 I'm going to start with because I always sense that the older it is, the more subtle it's going to be. So let me hit the subtle whiskeys first. I know tradition sometimes says go with younger to oldest, but less tainting my palate on the older whiskey, I think is the way I want to go on this. So when we start out, wow, there's kind of like a hazelnut note to this. Some wood spices, a little tobacco note coming in. It's an interesting whiskey in that there are some strong notes coming out of it, but they are really kind of based around the container that they came out of. And not a ton of like the personality of the banana nut bread note that I normally would get, or kind of that rye note coming through. I'm not really getting any of that there. Cheers. Okay, some of the Jack Daniels notes start coming through. I get a cola note. I get kind of a bready note. Well, that's kind of interesting where that came from. And that kind of, I'd call it, maybe Elvis would like this, banana nut sandwich. It has kind of a toasted, bready kind of note to it, which is really interesting. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Nice coat on the mouth. The rye spice starts to come through on the end. There's a little bit of heat on the palate. This is 117.6 proof, so it's a stronger whiskey, but it doesn't drink like 117 proof. Really nice on the palate. I find that on the nose, it's kind of leaning a lot into the barrel, whereas as you start getting closer to the finish, you really start getting some nice spice notes coming in there, and the character of Jack Daniel's starts to come out on the finish of this particular whiskey. So interesting tasting on that 14-year. I actually did a blind tasting on these earlier just so that I wouldn't be kind of biased towards one or the other. And so as I did my retasting, I actually did a retasting with some of the notes that were provided by the distillery. But I'm finding for myself and my own nose and palate that it's really the finish on this where the everything comes together really in terms of that Jack Daniel's character and more of the wood notes at the top. So, all right, now let's go into the 12-year. The 12-year is also high proof. This one is 107 proof, and this is their batch number 4 of the 12-year whiskey. This one, again, I get the cola note coming through here. It's really interesting that comes through a lot on older whiskeys. Perfumey, kind of a maple note coming through. Powdered sugar, maybe. I get leather notes on this, but kind of just mixed with that sweet character, which is really interesting. And I get a little bit of, like, if you walk into an old library, and you got kind of, I don't want to say musty books, but kind of, I get just a little hints of that. Really interesting. The nose is much sharper on this and much more interesting, I think, than on the 14-year. Cheers. The char really starts coming through on this one. More bitter oak coming through. It's really interesting because the 14 enhances the wood on the nose. This one is enhancing the wood on the finish. There's baking spice notes coming through. A little bit of caramel notes coming through, but not a lot of nuttiness, not a lot of depth on it, and then it kind of fades off the palate in terms of the flavor. Not left with as much of an impression of rye and banana nut bread or any of that coming through on the finish. This one kind of eases off the palate a little bit faster than the 14-year-old. And finally, let's do a tasting of the 10-year-old. Now, the 10-year-old is a much lower proof. This one is going to be 97 proof. Batch number 5 of the 10-year. This one, when I first put it to my nose, was somewhat aggressive, and that was before I had nosed the other two, which is interesting because it's the lower proof of them. But I think I have come to the feeling that aggressiveness that I thought that I was nosing was more of that Jack Daniel's character really just kind of nailing the nose. Banana nut, cola note to me, charred oak coming through on the palate. It's actually somewhat dry in the middle. I get maybe a little molasses note, a little bit of spice, and then it sweetens up as the finish comes about. Some sweetness, the rye starts popping out a lot more, It's much more of kind of the Jack Daniel's experience you expect. Again, little cola notes coming in there. Softer drinker, not as heavy in terms of coating the mouth as, say, the 14 was. Maybe getting a little black tea note in there. And I definitely get chocolate notes in there. There's other stuff going on in my brain too. Woody notes, but probably more in like wood shavings. It's not necessarily like an aged wood kind of a note. Not a lot of leather and tobacco kind of notes, but probably a little bit brighter on this one. As for which one stands out to me, it's really interesting because sometimes I change my mind from my original thought going into doing the video. I initially had it where the 10 was my favorite, mainly because it was brighter. It brought on more of the Jack Daniel's character to it. My second favorite was the 14 year because I like the mouth coating. I really like the finish on that whiskey. The beginning was probably a little bit more, it's not overly oaky. You know, I think that most people probably who have a higher tolerance for oaky whiskeys will say that's not really that oaky. I'm probably a little more wood sensitive, so I pick it up a little bit more probably than others, but that wasn't necessarily my favorite part of it. The 12 year, my favorite part was more the start of it and less as we got towards the finish of the whiskey. So I'm almost in the point where I'm saying the 12 and the 14 are kind of in a tie for second, and I really like the 10 year, but I think I could actually push the 14 out just a little bit ahead of the 12 year in terms of what I think about it. So that may be, again, when I go in and do these tastings, if I'd have done these tastings and seen the labels before I started, it may have pushed me more towards the 10 and away from the 14 because I tend to like younger spirits in terms of anything that's got a rye influence in it. And to me, when Jack is right, it has almost a perfect blend of oak and rye to where they create kind of their own infusion flavor that I'm a big fan of. And so I kind of look for that when I'm doing my tastings. And when that's not present, then I'm usually going to probably be slightly more disappointed. The banana nut flavor as well is something, and nose is something else that I look for in Jack Daniel's. It's like comfort food to me. So that's kind of where I stand on it. And so in terms of prices on these, I actually do have that listed here. $149 for the 14, $99 for the 12 year, and $89 for the 10 year. Good luck finding them. I have put the link below if you want to check out and enter the sweepstakes for a chance to get yourself a bottle. Hope you enjoyed this video, and watch for that Jack Daniel's video coming up in about 2 weeks where we go into the oldest registered distillery claim. Until next time, cheers and Slàinte mhath.